Welcome to iCarly. I know, you know. Hey YouTube, the Gossip Writer here. Welcome to my review for the Power Rangers in Space Pink Ranger figure from the Power Rangers Lightning Collection. In case you didn't know, I am reviewing this wave of the Lightning Collection separately, mainly because last time, I think with Wave 9, I had a hard time finding them all, together, and by the time I got the full wave review out, it was, irrelevant, so I'm just kind of reviewing them as I get them. But let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to talk accessories, as we always do at the beginning of these. As you saw from that intro, we have her head sculpt, which many people before me have pointed out looked kind of like Carly from iCarly, so I kind of had to do that bit. It does kind of look like Carly. Honestly, it looks like if Carly and Cassie did one of those, apps where you see what kind of baby you would have, or if you merged your faces. But honestly, it's not bad. It doesn't look actually that much like Cassie, but it's nothing offensive to me. And other than her holding weapons hands, you have a closed fist and a karate chop hand. Judo chop! Then you got her Astro Blaster, which is painted about as well as it should be. The gray plastic looks a little cheap. Speaking of, you have the Satellite Stunner here, which, again, my only real complaint about it is the gray plastic looks a little bit cheap, but it's not like it's a huge deal to me. And lastly, we do have this really neat lightning effect part. I'm pretty over the lightning effect parts at this point. There's literally just a bag full of them in my closet. I almost never use them, and I kind of wish they didn't even include them anymore, but I really do like when we have unique ones, and this one is a unique looking one. It also looks like a space basketball hoop. So let's talk about the figure itself. Let's get the articulation out of the way. I feel like if you're here, you already know par for the course stuff. Ball hinge joint here, all around motion there, double elbow joint, swiveling at the fist, ball joint at the leg, only slightly hindered by the skirt, only literally slightly, because it's actually really flexible and they do a good job on that. Double knee joint, hinge joint here, swiveling. You have waist and chest articulation, and then ball joint and neck articulation here. All around solid articulation and motion, and thankfully with mine, no loose joint problems, however your mileage may vary. Let's talk details. Now, the main thing you might notice at first is the helmet. Now, first of all, I think you can see it, but mine has some little white speckles on the top, which is a QC paint issue, which can be annoying, and that happens on lots of Lightning Collection figures, so if that's something that's going to bother you, I definitely recommend getting it in person. I ordered mine. I think I got this one on Amazon, so I couldn't pick that out, but if that's going to be something that's a big deal to you, either for this figure or others, definitely look for it in person so you can kind of compare them. But the head sculpt is a little bit off. It doesn't look bad. I think the paint looks good, and the proportions of it look solid, but if you look at her visor, and this is going to sound so nerdy and nitpicky, but it's not quite right. It's a little more angular than it should be because Pink's visor is a little bit more round. In fact, when this was shown off, a lot of people mistakenly believed, oh crap, they just put yellows on there. But if you look at yellows, it's actually not the same visor because
if you look here, actually yellow has one.
You know what I mean? You can see it's clearly a different visor, but I can see how people thought that because they did make it more angular. And in fact, on the box, it actually does show the more rounded version. So that is a little bit of an annoyance. It sounds like kind of a pathetic nerd complaint, but it's definitely something worth noting in a collector's line, but I'll get into that more later. So that's definitely a con for this figure. Another con is there is a major discrepancy, at least in my opinion, in the color on here. You have this sort of darker, almost pinkish purple color here for the chest, and then the rest of it is kind of more of a normal, leaning towards hot pink. You will get that sometimes with figures, like with reds and stuff, they'll sometimes have arms that are a little bit of a different color, but this one really stands out to me. This looks to me like she ran this through the wash and it got too dark, or she put on the wrong colored top. It really stands out, because in most cases when that happens, you still can't really tell from a distance. This isn't going to be where it's on my display and I'm like, ugh, you're trash. But I can definitely tell more even from a distance. With a lot of those ones, where the red's arms don't match, once I get it on the shelf and I sit back, I hardly even notice, but this one is probably one of the most noticeable in that regard. The paint looks good and it doesn't look cheap or anything like that, and I think the general mold and proportions of this figure are good in terms of a female mold, but yeah, it definitely stands out, and I think that because of that, this is the weakest in-space figure release for me, between the inaccurate helmet and the discrepancies in the color here. Now, going along with that, let me compare her to some past versions so you can sort of see how that all stacks up. Okay, so here we have some other main versions. This is the old Legacy version, and this is the original 1990s version, and you can see generally the sculpt on this is a much better and more accurate figure for a female body, and this is a lot more of a hot pink looking color. However, it's worth noting, if you look at the helmets, they both have that problem of the sort of angular sides that isn't well rounded like the helmet should be, which I think is interesting. I think this one's a little bit more rounded than this one on the Lightning Collection, but I thought that was interesting because that was the first thing I did before even looking up a... Come on, son. As I was saying, that was the first thing I did before I even looked up a picture of In Space Pink's helmet so I was sure, was I pulled this figure out thinking, oh, is it going to be more accurate? And actually is a little bit angular. Not as bad as this one, but it's kind of just worth noting that oddly enough, despite this being probably the least accurate overall looking helmet, it has the most accurate visor, which I just think is funny because usually when I bring in the 90s version or the 2000s version or whatever, it's usually, my point of that is like, yeah, this is the least accurate and you only want to get it if you like collecting retro toys. That's still the case, but I just think it's one of the only times that there's been something more accurate about the 90s version. This is still probably the best version, but it's still got a lot of weak points. I also wanted to note, because I almost forgot to say it, is you really have a noticeable gap here in her arm and shoulder, which just really sticks out. And honestly, overall, for me, this is one of my most disappointing Lightning releases. I think it's really one of the most inconsistent ones. Honestly, it's more so about the color. The weird color inconsistencies make it look so all over the place. The helmet definitely sucks, and I wish it was more accurate, but that's not a huge deal breaker for me. Like, the helmet alone wouldn't be something that would stop me from buying this to complete my main in-space team, but it's just kind of a bunch of things overall that I think make this a weaker release for the price, which kind of puts you in a tough spot if you really want to complete your collection. So I'll just say, maybe wait for a sale if you want to complete your collection and you're impatient. I don't know how likely it is that this would get an update soon, but I could definitely see this being a figure that could get an update in the future. Like, I could totally see them doing another Fan First Pink Ranger Friday and do like a Cassie pack with Pink Turbo, another In-Space Pink that would maybe be fixed, because they have done that. They have fixed a couple figures, so you might have to wait a while. But if you don't like the looks of this and you have the same complaints I do and you're patient, I would maybe wait for something like that. So I think this is one of the weaker releases so far. But that's about it for this one, guys. Until next time, don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. The Awesome Writer, signing out.